This chapter we are going to study cost accounting, and in grade 10 and 11 we dealt with the terminology, the calculations and ledger accounts of a manufacturing business. In grade 12 we are going to look at the financial statements of a manufacturing business. But first, let's just revise what we have done in grade 10 and 11. So, the cost in a manufacturing business can be classified under the following headings. We have our manufacturing costs, which is the cost incurred from turning raw material into the finished product. And then on the other hand, we have period costs, which is costs incurred from running the business. So let's delve a bit deeper into manufacturing costs. Our manufacturing costs consist, among other things, of direct material costs. That's the raw material used to make a product. Direct labor costs, the so-called touch labor, the wages that are paid to the factory workers. And then the factory overhead costs. That is all the indirect costs incurred from manufacturing the product, like, for example, the rent of the factory. Similarly, let's delve a bit deeper into the period costs. So there, for example, we have administration costs. That's the cost related to the administration of the business, like the telephone account and the receptionist's salary. And then we also have sales and distribution costs. That is costs related to the marketing, the selling, and the distributing of the product, like the commission paid to the sales representative. So the manufacturing cost, this information is summarized in what we refer to as the production cost statement, where we calculate the cost of production. And the period costs, these expenses are deducted from the gross profit in the income statement in order to calculate the net profit. So next we are going to focus on the types of manufacturing costs. Manufacturing costs are the costs incurred by the manufacturer to produce its products from raw material to finished goods. Let's use Wayne Racing Kayaks, a manufacturer of canoes and oars, to illustrate these costs. So we have the material costs, the labor costs, and the factory overhead, as alluded to previously. For the material costs, we have the direct material costs. That's the raw material consumed directly in the manufacturing of a product. For example, the wood, the glass fiber, and the pedals to make a canoe or an oar. Then we also have the indirect material costs. So material costs, it's split in direct material costs and indirect material costs. The indirect material costs are the costs incurred during the manufacturing process, not directly identified in the finished product. For example, the screws, the bolts in a canoe, etc. Then we have our labor costs. We have the direct labor costs, labor which is directly applied to transform material into a finished product. For example, the people building the canoes. And then we have the indirect labor costs. That is the salaries and wages paid to the people not directly linked to manufacturing the product. For example, the the salary paid to the bookkeeper. And then finally we have our factory overhead costs. This is the costs involved in manufacturing the product but which are not directly linked to the product. For example, electricity, depreciation of machinery, indirect material costs, and indirect labor costs. So this indirect material and indirect labor cost forms actually part of the factory overhead. So as mentioned, this is just an illustration that indirect material costs are included with factory overhead costs. The same for indirect labor. Factory overhead costs does include all the production costs, excluding the direct material costs and the direct labor costs. Next, let's focus on the classification of manufacturing costs. Because indirect material costs and indirect labor costs form part of factory overhead costs, manufacturing costs are usually classified under the following three headings: the direct material costs, the direct labor costs, and the factory overheads, which we said include stuff like water, electricity, screws, etc. Now let's focus on the manufacturing cost calculations. The costs involved in manufacturing a product are divided into two groups. We have the prime costs, which is our direct costs, and then we have the factory overhead costs, which we have seen is the indirect costs. So the prime costs refers to the total direct costs involved in the manufacturing process. The prime costs include the direct material costs and the direct labor costs. So in equation form, prime cost is direct material costs plus direct labor costs. The total manufacturing costs of production are calculated by adding all the costs incurred in the production process. Therefore, the total manufacturing cost in equation form equals the prime costs plus the factory overhead costs. Unit costs. The unit cost of a product is the cost per item or per unit. Unit means one. So the cost for one item. So therefore, in equation form, our unit cost of a product is equal to the total manufacturing cost divided by the number of units produced.